Hello everyone. I would like to thank you for joining my presentation today. Before I begin, I would like to ask, do you believe that language teachers are also teachers of culture? If the answer is yes, please use the thumbs up emoji to respond. Okay, and I have one more question. Do you think that if we teach a language course, cultural teaching comes naturally, even if we do not plan for it? Again, if the answer is yes, please use thumbs up to respond. Okay, thank you very much for your responses. So today I will argue in favor of purposefully integrating cultural teaching in our classes. I will describe two different cultural activities used in my modern Greek as a second language classes and point out the benefits for all members of the learning community. So let me now start with a few theoretical underpinnings. During the past years, incessant population mobility, extensive cross-cultural contacts, and global communications have generated renewed interest in teaching cultural or intercultural aspects of language. Indeed, no language is culturally neutral in the sense that every time you use language, you construct or negotiate meaning, and meaning cannot be produced. Meaning cannot be understood without comprehending the cultural norms, values, and beliefs associated with it. What is meant by culture here is the things that are shared by members of a community, such as social habits and conventions, rules of etiquette, for example, polite behavior, daily life, etc. Although the importance of culture teaching has been widely demonstrated in the literature, the inextricable relation between language and culture has led to the misconception that by teaching language, one automatically teaches culture. Language learners may indeed pick up certain cultural clues without explicit instruction, especially in a second language learning setting. For example, students learning Greek in Greece will at some point pick up that Greeks use a lot of diminutive forms. For instance, Greeks often say, I'm eating a small apple. In Greek, milaraki, while they might be eating one huge apple. Or they might say, could I ask you for a little water? In Greek, neraki, when they might actually mean a whole bottle or jar of water. Eventually, students might even start integrating such forms into their own speech. The question is, will they understand why Greeks use so many diminutives in their everyday speech? Will they understand what kind of hidden messages they communicate when using such forms, unless this is explicitly explained to them? So I argue here that although language learners may indeed pick up certain cultural clues without explicit instruction, in order for them to become intercultural competent, and here is one of the many definitions of intercultural competence, they need to be taught culture explicitly. What is meant by that? This means that students need to observe practices that form part of the target everyday way of life. They need to reflect on various cultural facts. They need to compare and contrast their own and target culture, and they need to be given a chance to offer their observations, their viewpoints on that. They need to be explained the cultural norms that underlie linguistic forms, and they need to engage in intentional, meaningful class activities that aim at develop their cultural awareness. To this end, in this presentation, I will demonstrate two activities used in a modern Greek as a second language classroom that aim at promoting an understanding of other cultures and also a positive interest in other cultures. So let me now turn to the first activity that I conduct in my beginners classes. Here, learners are presented with a short dialogue. Students are divided into groups of 4 to 5 people, depending on the size of the class. And they are asked to read this dialogue between two close friends who are making plans to get together and do something tonight. In a nutshell, one of the two friends invites the other person to her place. The invited person asks whether he should bring something, and his friend says, yes, a little wine. So a diminutive form of the Greek word for wine is used. The response to this is that the invited person will bring 2 bottles of wine. First, students are asked to discuss the meaning of new words or words they do not recall with their team members. Then, as a group, they need to identify the topic of the dialogue and answer 2 questions. The first question is about the use of a diminutive form in the dialogue, krasaki in Greek, which means little wine. Although one of the friends is asking for a little wine, the other person is saying that he will bring 2 bottles. What is happening here? As we all know, the primary function of diminutives is to express the idea of little or small. In the dialogue of the activity, the diminutive form is not to be interpreted literally. However, students are asked to reflect on this, bearing in mind that in Greek, diminutives are also employed to indicate affection, tenderness, and positive emotions, especially when used with names for people. During a discussion that takes place, students come to the conclusion that in Greek, diminutive forms of words denoting objects are used to express closeness and solidarity. When you talk to someone who is close to you, the moment you use a diminutive of a word denoting an object, provided, of course, that you also use appropriate intonation, you express solidarity. As such, diminutive forms denote dear little things that people feeling very close to each other share or intend to share. The second question is there a part in the dialogue you have read that would not normally be included in a dialogue of this sort in Greek everyday life? What is the intended part here? It is the part where the 2 friends rather thank or rather overthank each other. Thank you for the wine, says one of them. Thank you for the invitation, responds the other. These are formalities that are not usually observed among Greek friends. In fact, overthanking a friend may actually alienate or insult a friend, as it functions as a distancing device, given that inviting a friend over or bringing over wine is expected of a friend, and therefore one should not express one's gratitude for it unless one is not considered a friend, but rather an acquaintance. And this gives the class a chance to discuss differences in expressing politeness in different cultures. Let me now turn to the second activity. This is for intermediate learners. Here again, learners are presented with a short dialogue which includes a cultural mishap. Interestingly, this is based on a true story. This had happened to an American student of mine who shared this story with me, as he needed my help to explain the cultural misunderstanding that had taken place. And indeed, if you plan to conduct a culture activity, true stories that your students may share with you may serve as scenarios for them. So this is a dialogue between 2 classmates and close friends, a Greek one and an American study abroad student. They attend the same class. Before the class starts, the American student realizes he does not have a pencil, notices a few pencils on his friend's desk, and politely asks whether he can borrow one. The Greek friend becomes very annoyed, and the American student is very perplexed. The students read the dialogue, discuss the meaning of words, and try to explain what has happened. During a class conversation that follows, we come to the conclusion that the Greek friend was insulted by the fact that his American friend felt the need to ask for his permission to borrow a pencil. Again, close friends do not observe such formalities, so the Greek person interpreted this as a distancing practice. In other words, the message he received was, I cannot take the pencil without asking you because we are not that close. Hence, his disappointment. The American student, on the other hand, was operating on the cultural norm that no matter how close we feel to someone, we need to make sure we do not overstep the boundaries and we are always discreet. Hence, he's asking whether he could borrow the pencil. What is fascinating here is that both friends were being very polite. That is, they were either acting or responding to an action following politeness rules and norms. It's just that these norms are different in the two respective cultures. Let us now look at the impact activities of this type may have on learners. First of all, learners are very engaged in such activities. Such activities are a nice break for grammar and vocabulary and similar aspects of language and do get students on board. Furthermore, these activities get students to think critically and actively learn about different cultures. Students come to realize that there is so much more to learning a language than learning its grammar or vocabulary, and that learning to operate with cultural efficiency in a variety of sometimes unfamiliar situations is also important. More importantly, language learners start interpreting the host national's behavior through the host culture lens rather than through their own culture's lens. This leads to a better understanding of their own culture as well, because defining the other often helps define one's own self. Students develop higher levels of empathy and tolerance for ambiguity and are equipped with skills needed to function in a diverse world society and not just in their immediate environment. And precisely because we want to help students become able to function and work in multicultural environments, irrespective of their particular field, activities of this type can be used in many different classes as they are easily adaptable to a wide variety of educational settings. To give you an example, students in a business course may be presented with a scenario for a professional meeting of people from various cultural or ethnic backgrounds. This meeting could involve a cultural mishap or misunderstanding. For instance, during this meeting, a Greek person could use a direct request, which actually sounds natural and quite polite to the Greek native ear, and which might, however, be perceived as rude by others. So a whole discussion about similarities and differences in the professional meeting etiquette between various cultures may follow. So these are the references. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there is time for discussion, I would like to open it up by asking you if you think that culture teaching or activities similar to the ones I presented here can be integrated into your own discipline or classes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophia. It's really interesting because I can see how I could apply a similar type of sort of almost giving the students that sort of scenario to get them discussing sort of like cultural differences, and I'm teaching a completely different subject, but and I'd put it in the chat. I wondered, and again, this is open to everybody to comment, I wondered how much we could use this as a tool to help with diversifying the curriculum and, you know, sort of understanding those wider perspectives on what we're teaching.
Could you please repeat the last part because there was a break?
And so I wondered how much we could use it to help us diversify the curriculum and start to sort of encourage students to think about the different perspectives on the content we're delivering.
Exactly, that's the idea here. The idea is not to equip students with all the skills needed in order to communicate in different situations. Okay, that's one goal, but there is a wider goal than this to help them become able to communicate across cultural boundaries, to be able to create intercultural speakers or intercultural citizens out of them, because, as you said, they will be in a better position to understand or even negotiate cultural differences. So they develop empathy and tolerance for ambiguity.
Yeah, and just so Beatrice has posted in the chat, I don't know whether you can see the chat, about do we have to be careful about some dominant cultures, and she's referring particularly to languages, becoming, sort of taking over. How do we ensure that we get balance in this?
What we need to bear in mind is the notion of equity of cultures. There is, in all these different practices, cultural practices that are employed by members of a community, there's nothing right or wrong. What we need to bear in mind that these are different practices, and they have to be, well, we need to help students understand them and accept them as something different, and helping them take a deeper view towards culture, putting themselves into other people's shoes and viewing things from their perspective, will create this sense of equity of cultures and tolerance for difference, as I said before.